Ladies and gentlemen, close your eyes and imagine. London, 1899, a vast city drowned in a dense, choking fog where the faint glow of gas lamps flickers through the damp, fetid alleys of Bermondsey and Southwark, the slums Charles Booth once described in his 1889 poverty map as the darkest places of earthly hell. In that darkness wanders a tiny figure, only 4 feet 8 inches tall, about 1.42 meters, as recorded precisely in the 1903 Register of Habitual Drunkards at the Metropolitan Police, drifting like a restless ghost. Not Jack the Ripper with his cold blade, but a woman, her hands trembling from cheap gin and a fury that would never fade. Pub owners whispered her name in trembling fear, Charlotte Charlton. Why would a small, impoverished woman terrify burly landlords, men hardened by years behind the bar, into shuttering their windows and praying whenever her shadow appeared? Why did the courts record hundreds of outbursts from her, from the yellowed reports of the Southwark Police Court in 1884 to the long prison rolls at Holloway and Wormwood Scrubs? Let me tell you, slowly, through the pages of history I have turned under candlelight from the court record of 1868, when Charlotte, only 21, clasped her infant son Alfred and leapt into the River Thames near London Bridge after a quarrel with her husband. Picture it, the Thames, black and cold, swallowing hope itself. Charlotte, pale-faced, clutching her child, hurled herself into the surging water. A sailor, Thomas Banfield, aboard the ship Maria moored at Fenning's Wharf, heard the desperate cry and plunged in, soaked, losing his shoes and hat, dragging her to safety. But fate was cruel. Only days later, little Alfred William James Charlton, just 3 months old, died in the Bermondsey workhouse from tabes, likely tuberculosis, as listed on the death certificate. Charlotte was there when her son drew his last breath. His father, John Charlton, a house painter, appears in the 1871 census. The detail matches exactly that first case. A family tragedy was recorded as attempted suicide from poverty and despair in the Surrey Police Court report. Published in the Daily Telegraph on July 18, 1868, she told the court with remorse, "I am very sorry." Yet that sorrow was only the beginning of decades of madness that would make London tremble. But the ghost did not rest. In the 1880 records of the Mansion House Police Court, we find Charlotte, now listed under her maiden name, Charlotte Bank, again leaping into the Thames from the London Bridge stairs. She whispered to a witness, "Now I'll do my work," before plunging into the black water. A young gentleman rescued her, but she told the police firmly, "I meant to do it," in 1886. The South London press reported yet another attempt. Charlotte jumped from the stairs near Southwark Bridge and was dragged out by a constable. The magistrate noted, "This is the second, perhaps the third time, she has been pulled from the river." These were not random acts. They were cries from the depths of despair, from a Victorian world where women were bound by poverty, grief, and gin, a world laid bare in Andrew Mearns's The Bitter Cry of Outcast. London, 1883. Then came the transformation, despair turning outward into violence. In 1882, under the alias Emily Williams, Charlotte was convicted at the Southern Police Court for smashing glass, the beginning of a long, destructive career. In 1884, at the Middlesex Sessions. She was sentenced to 6 months in Millbank Prison for malicious damage, one broken window pane worth only 8 pence. Picture it. Ladies and gentlemen, a small, drunken woman bursting into a pub, hurling a stone through the glass, the sound echoing through London's night. The chaos peaked in 1892. Lambeth Police Court records describe Charlotte attacking the Tankard Tavern in Kennington. Not once, but 4 or 5 times before that, she had returned, smashing the same windows. She threw a brick through the door just after her release from prison, shouting, "I'll throw vitriol in your face." Vitriol, sulfuric acid, the monstrous weapon of the Victorian age, leaving victims burned, scarred, and forever disfigured, as documented in countless medical reports. She carried the bottle in her pocket, and her threat forced the landlord to flee London altogether. The attacks continued in 1893. Islington Gazette reported Charlotte, fresh from Holloway Prison that very morning, returning drunk and smashing glass again, the 3rd time at the same pub. 2 months hard labor. The press called her homeless and hopeless. By 1896, Illustrated Police News featured her again, storming Sir John Barleycorn Tavern in Whitechapel, destroying windows in revenge for an 8-year grudge against a former employer. She was compared to Jane Cakebread, the infamous alcoholic, as her heir to chaos, and in 1898, South London press reported yet another outburst at the Tankard Tavern, a single pane worth 10 pence. But the court called her the chronic glassbreaker, with a record too long to read aloud. She was sentenced to 12 months hard labor. Each time she was released, she returned a ghost that would not die. By 1903, police records described her as the most dangerous woman in London. The photograph from Wormwood Scrubs, 1901, shows her gaunt, her eyes burning with anger, teeth missing, and a scar across her right hand, the mark of a life destroyed by misery. This is not just the story of a criminal. It is the story of a society, a mirror of Victorian cruelty, where poverty, loss, and addiction turned flesh and blood into something monstrous. And now, follow me deeper into the shadows, into the prison archives of 1903, where Charlotte's hollow face, furious eyes, and shattered teeth will finally reveal the truth behind London's fear. But the question remains, was she truly a monster, or simply a victim of her time? The tension rises, and the answer lies in the chapters to come. From the faded birth records kept at St. Mary Magdalene Church, Bermondsey, we learn that Charlotte was born around 1847, the daughter of William Bancroft, a shoemaker from Bath, and Charlotte, a leather bookbinder. South London in those days was steeped in the stench of tanneries and the weight of crushing poverty, vividly described in Charles Booth's 1889 social surveys as a maze of narrow alleys, wandering children and families crammed into damp, decaying rooms. Picture young Charlotte, a small girl who grew up among the hammering of leather, the smell of glue, and the sweat of despair. By 1861, the census lists her at age 14, working as a domestic servant in South Hackney, a grueling life of scrubbing floors from dawn till dusk, sharing a cramped room with her parents. Her father, William, 43, was a shoemaker. Her mother, 13, a bookbinder. A typical working-class family who moved from Surrey to Hackney in search of work. But poverty clung to them like a shadow. Then in 1865, At St. Jude's Church, Southwark, Charlotte married John Charlton, a 23-year-old house painter, when she was just 18. Imagine that wedding day, a modest ceremony in a dim church filled with fragile hopes of a better life. They had 4 children: John, Jr., Alfred, Charles, and Albert. But happiness was fleeting, and tragedy struck in 1868. According to the Surrey Police Court records, published in the Weekly Dispatch on July 19th, after a bitter quarrel with her husband, Charlotte, clutching her infant son Alfred, ran toward London Bridge and threw herself into the Thames. Her scream echoed through the fog as the icy water swallowed them both. A sailor, Thomas Banfield, dove in and pulled her out, but the baby did not survive. On July 22nd, Alfred died in the Bermondsey workhouse of exhaustion, a heart-wrenching climax in which Charlotte watched her child fade away, her trembling hand signing the death certificate. The document lists John Charlton, the father, as a house painter, a detail that perfectly matches the 1871 census, where the family lived at Oxbridge Place, Newington, with 2 surviving sons, John Jr., aged 5, recorded with a disability, and Charles, aged 1, along with Charlotte's elderly mother. But the tragedy did not end there. By 1871, census data already shows the family fragmenting, Charlotte living apart, drifting through London's dark streets. Grief, poverty, and gin, the 3 specters of Victorian misery. As analyzed in Andrew Mearns's The Bitter Cry of Outcast London, 1883, began to consume her. In 1880, as reported by the Morning Post, she once again jumped into the Thames from London Bridge, rescued by a gentleman, yet declared defiantly that she was determined to do it. Then, in 1886, the South London Press recorded her 3rd plunge, this time from Southwark Bridge, dragged out by a constable. The magistrate sighed. This is the 2nd, or perhaps the 3rd time she has been pulled from the river. These suicide attempts were not mere acts of madness. They were the desperate cries of a soul crushed by a merciless society. They were the first echoes of the ghost she would become. From this point, Charlotte's despair would turn outward into rage, into violence, into the legend of the glassbreaker. But this foundation, a childhood steeped in poverty, a mother's grief, a woman broken by loss, is the key to understanding why she became the terror that haunted London's darkest corners. Now, let us turn the pages of the prison records from Millbank and Holloway, where Charlotte was first incarcerated in 1880 under the alias Charlotte Bank, once again, after attempting to end her life by jumping into the river. But her true descent into crime began in the 1880s. According to court records from 1882, under the name Emily Williams, she was convicted for breaking a window, an act she would repeat countless times. Driven by her growing hatred toward Pugglicks at the Lambeth Police Court, she was sentenced to 6 months' imprisonment for violent and dangerous conduct, as recorded in detailed proceedings. Imagine the scene. Ladies and gentlemen, a small woman, drunk and trembling with rage, storms into the Tankard Tavern in Kennington, a stone clutched tightly in her hand. She hurls it through the glass with a piercing crash. Blood streams down her fingers, and she threatens the terrified landlord with sulfuric acid vitriol, that dreaded weapon of the age, so often mentioned in Victorian medical reports on acid burns in 1890. According to the Westminster Police Court, She was arrested for ringing the bell of Millbank Prison without cause, shouting to see the warden sentenced to 14 days at Holloway. The tension reached new heights in 1892, when at the Lambeth Police Court, Charlotte once again smashed the windows of the Tankard Tavern, hurled bricks, and screamed at the landlord Rushton, "I'll throw acid at you." Rushton trembled with fear in 1893. The Islington Gazette reported her return to Holloway Prison for the third time, once again for breaking glass. In 1896, the Illustrated Police News described her attack on the Sir John Barleycorn Tavern, calling her a woman who carried an 8-year grudge. Records from the Metropolitan Police labeled her as a habitual window breaker, responsible for over 40 repeat offenses. Victorian society saw her as a menace, but behind that name lay a story of grief, loss, and rebellion. Each shattered pane of glass was not just destruction, it was the echo of a woman's scream, drowned long ago beneath the waters of the Thames. Stop now at the year 1898, when Charlotte shattered 10 panes of glass at the Tankard Tavern, once again screaming at Rushton, "I'll throw acid at you." According to the Southern Court records, terrified, publicans fled the district, yet Charlotte continued to hunt them down, her fury unrelenting. By 1902, the Morning Leader reported another incident. She smashed the pub's water jar, claiming it was to commemorate her past triumphs. Then, in 1903, the Evening Standard delivered the final blow to her infamy. Charlotte was caught stealing a pair of shoes, branded by the press as the most dangerous woman in London. She was sentenced to 3 years of penal servitude at Aylesbury Prison, where she threatened, "I'll burn this place down." A surviving Wormwood Scrubs photograph from that time shows her gaunt and hollow-eyed, a frail body, yet still radiating defiance. Her persistence made even the powerful men of London tremble. Charlotte was no longer merely a criminal. She had become a symbol of rebellion, a living ghost haunting the Victorian order, the woman who made London afraid. Now, let us turn to the year 1903, when Charlotte, then 51 years old, stood before the Southern Police Court beneath the flickering gaslight. Her face was gaunt, her eyes burning with fury, just as they appear in the surviving mugshot from Wormwood. Scrubs, a stark black and white portrait of a woman in a prison uniform, hair in disarray, a scar running down her right hand, each mark a testament to years of hard labor and rage, according to the Evening Standard. Dated June 15th, 1903, this was her final public trial. She was accused of stealing a pair of shoes from a shop in Kennington, a petty crime worth only a few pence. Yet her outburst in court transformed it into high drama. She shouted at the magistrate, "I don't care. I'll do it again." Her defiance shocked the room. The judge, visibly shaken, declared her the most dangerous woman in London, a menace to society. This was the first time the newly enforced Habitual Drunkards Act of 1902, a harsh Victorian law designed to reform women like her, was applied to Charlotte. She was sentenced to 3 years confinement at the Aylesbury Inebriate Reformatory, a grim institution in Buckinghamshire where women addicted to alcohol were treated like wild creatures to be tamed. Imagine the scene, Charlotte, barely 4 feet 8 inches tall, shackled and led to a prison van that rattled along the wet cobblestone streets, the iron wheels echoing like the final toll of a bell. But the drama did not end there. From the internal reports of Aylesbury Reformatory, preserved in the UK National Archives, we learn that Charlotte was far from submissive. She allegedly threatened to burn the prison to the ground. "I'll turn this place into ashes." Her threats earned her solitary confinement in a cold, lightless cell. There, she was said to whisper to the darkness, speaking to the ghosts of her dead children, to the cold Thames, and to the pub owners she still cursed by name. When she was finally released in 1906, she returned to London. But the Lambeth police court records of 1907 show her arrested again for drunkenness and disorderly conduct, trapped in a tragic loop. Like a character from a Greek tragedy who cannot escape her fate, she drifted in and out of the Bermondsey workhouses, where thousands of destitute Victorian women huddled together in damp, disease-ridden rooms. A medical report from 1908 described her as emaciated from chronic alcoholism, with missing teeth, trembling hands, and failing health. Yet even then, she caused a final uproar during an argument with a workhouse attendant. She hurled a wooden chair, shouting, "I am not a prisoner here. I am Charlotte Charlton, the woman London fears." And then came 1912. According to the South London Press, March 22, 1912, Charlotte, now 58, was arrested once more for drunkenness on Kennington Road, not far from the Tankard Tavern, the very place she had shattered windows dozens of times. Before the court, her voice trembled, but her defiance remained. "I've lived through hell. What more can you do to me?" The weary magistrate, staring at a file thick with over 40 charges spanning 3 decades, from attempted suicide to destruction of property, sentenced her to 3 final years of penal servitude at Aylesbury. That was the last anyone ever saw of her. A letter from a fellow inmate, now held in the British Library archives, claimed that Charlotte spent long nights recounting her life, the death of her infant son Alfred, the bottles of sulfuric acid she never used, and a great secret she promised to reveal. But what was that secret? A hidden crime? An imagined conspiracy? Or merely the last delusions of a broken soul? After 1915, the records fall silent. No death certificate, no grave, nothing. Only a vanishing into the shadows of the Victorian workhouse system, which swallowed so many women like her. Historians, such as Judith Walkowicz, in City of Dreadful Delight, 1992, describe women like Charlotte as the outcast, daughters of empire, victims of poverty, loss, and addiction. The Poor Law Amendment Act of 1834 turned workhouses into prisons of despair. For women, especially, it was a slow death behind brick and iron. Charlotte was no monster. She was a victim of her age, a woman crushed beneath moral hypocrisy and social cruelty, seeking power in the only way she could, through defiance, destruction, and her own myth. By the turn of the century, the press had turned her into a symbol, the terror of publicans, the mirror of Jane Cakebread, that other infamous drunkard of London with over 300 arrests. Immortalized in the Illustrated Police News of 1896, Charlotte terrified London not through strength, but through endurance, a tiny, ragged woman who refused to disappear quietly. So pause here, dear listener. At the height of this tension, Charlotte fades from the record, but her story does not end. Somewhere in the unexamined archives may lie the truth, a final plan for revenge, an act never carried out or perhaps a confession of the deepest kind? And more importantly, do such ghosts still walk among us? Women cast aside by society, shaped by poverty, madness, and addiction. Charlotte's legacy whispers through the smog of history, a reminder that the past never dies. It only waits if your heart is still racing. If curiosity grips you, then stay tuned for the next chapter, where we uncover the story of Jane Cakebread, the queen of the London courts, whose tale makes even Charlotte's seem tame. Prepare yourself, for in the fog of old London, history still breathes.